Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and this video is an update and continuation from my last video, which was the introduction to and discussion of a pre-dynamic.
Just pause it just there for a sec. So I'm going to be watching this video, and also I've got my programs opened up ready to add as a extra layer where we can see the artifact in 3D, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about repairing this vase as we go with watching the video. So get ready to enjoy that. Just hide that for a second and let Ben introduce the video that he's got on, and I'm really hoping that you guys will actually check out his channel as well. So I'm confusing myself here with lots of mouses.
Dynastic ancient Egyptian granite vase. The vase in question was analysed by expert metrologists, working from the results of a structured light scan, a process that mapped the vase's geometric features accurately down to 1/1000th of an inch. The results were, in a word, astonishing, and represent a true game changer for the study of ancient precision. If you haven't seen that video already, I definitely recommend pausing this and watching that one first. It will provide a lot of context to what I'll get into here. But today, I'm going to share some additional analysis of the vase, talk a little bit about the reaction to that work, as well as share more of my discussion with Alex, Nick, and Adam. We talked about what the results from the scanning process mean from a manufacturing perspective, the nature of precision analysis, and how these techniques might apply to other ancient artifacts and sites in ancient Egypt. I do want to say thank you to everyone for the response to the last vase video. There were a lot of excellent comments, particularly.
So yeah, basically I'm going to probably mute the video for a bit and get into it and talk over it, and then probably put it back on again when I'm not got anything to say. So I'll just do that now and then hit play again.
Particularly those from engineers, machinists, and manufacturing.
Okay. Alrighty, I can hear him, but you guys can't. Okay, so basically what we've got here is, actually let's take the headphones off for a second, it's a bit distracting. Okay, so what I've got here is the vase, and if you have a look, you can actually see that. Actually, I'm just going to mute the video, period. Okay, that's better. Okay, yes, so I'll just turn that back on so I don't forget later.
If you go to the post for this video on my website.
Still. Turn it off. Okay. Yes. So we've got some serious errors in this, and when I opened it in Cura did not look happy. So let's just do that now, and I'll show you what we could see. So I'm really confused by my multiple screens and my mouse. So if you see me looking like a dumbass, it's because I'm waving the mouse around looking at the wrong screen while I'm waving it on a preview of that screen. So just ignore me if I do look stupid. Okay, so I'm bringing up the vase in Cura, and the first thing that we will notice... Sorry, just bear with me for a second. Let's get Cura to behave itself. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is there's a sign here saying the highlighted areas indicate either missing or extraneous surfaces. Fix your model and open it again into Cura. I'm going to just close that message box, and we'll notice that it is teensy-weensy. So something went wrong with the scale. Now I'm not sure exactly what the size of the real vase is. Maybe it's on the screen in front of me. Yeah, no, not really. It's not particularly big anyway. It looked fairly small on the table, so I'm just going to wing it and try and guess the size based on a scaling percentage, and hope that I get it right. So before I scaled it to 6,000 or something like that, but I think that was a bit wrong. I'm just going to add a 0. Yeah, I think it's bigger than that. If I add that, it ends up quite large. It's not this big, so I'm guessing that it's not scaled by an even factor. So I'm going to take that 10 and make it 5. Still pretty damn big. This is a fairly big printer. That makes it nearly 100 mil tall. I wonder if it does mention the actual height. Anyway, look, I don't particularly care at the moment for the size. I'm going to probably print it smaller than it really is for starters anyway. But that's an interesting thing to note. While I'm tinkering, and just going to put this audio back on for you guys.
Times and possessed extremely sophisticated manufacturing capability and technology. Further, it also seems obvious to me that the relatively primitive civilizations of Mesolithic, pre-dynastic and early Old Kingdom times, which is anywhere from 15,000 to 2000 BC, they recognized the sophistication and obvious value and achievement represented by these objects. They imitated the artifacts and were buried with them as valuable treasures to take into the afterlife. Kings and rulers like Djoser of the Third Dynasty even collected these objects in
What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the outside of this by going and generating some face groups. Now that's sort of kind of created one big face group there, so I'm just going to tweak that angle threshold a bit until it actually, yeah, there we go. That gives me some good separate chunks. Because what I want to do is kind of break this thing down a bit. So I'm going to double click on the green patch, and then hold down Control and roll my mouse wheel out just to select any odd little triangles that were a bit out of place, and just make that into a bigger chunk. So that's done that. And now I can just hit the Y key, which will separate it along the edges of all the triangles, which I'll show you the triangles in a sec. There's a lot of them. This is a fairly detailed scan. There may have been more originally, but they've reduced them. But there they are. So now what we can do, we can hide that chunk. And we're now left with the internal bit, which is fairly damaged. So, now obviously anything I do to this to fix it up is going to be bodging it up as far as accuracy goes. So if anybody is wanting to take measurements from this, that is going to be a challenge. So obviously the scan can only see what it can see. So the scanner would have been trying to look into this pot, and it was on a turntable. You can see that it's been repeated. There's like the light's probably, you know, just sort of strobing its way in there as it's turning or something and getting it unevenly. Having scanned a few things myself, I can imagine this not being an easy scan to do. Trying to get the inside of that. They've done a pretty good job at the outside. And one of the features that is talked about is the accuracy of the wall thicknesses. Now, they did also have a probing looking machine when they were doing that, and I can imagine with that they could probe the inside between, you know, like the two. I'll just turn one of these invisible. I mean, I imagine, you know, like if you're looking in here, you can probably probe between that point there and the outer wall there, and get a measurement from there to there, and then you could do the same over this side. But with the scan, it's to do with the lighting and everything, I would say. Just trying to get light inside that hole as well as get the scanner inside that hole without getting in its own shadow and dicking around. I can imagine that being quite hard. So, yeah, you know, you can see here they've got these measurements, and I don't know, maybe this model that they're looking at here, maybe it's slightly different to the model they've given us to print. I'm not sure, but either way, my aim is to make this printable and make it look good from the outside. I was hoping to fix it up so that we could measure some cross sections, but looking at that, I don't feel like I can produce a model where I can confidently say, you know, if you print this and measure it with verniers, you'll get something that's somewhat accurate. I don't feel like I can do that. Come on, you little bugger, get out of the way. Yeah, so, you know, there's bits of it that you'll be able to do that with, like down the bottom here, you'll be able to check around there, because that's sort of, you know, unscathed. I mean, unless you get unlucky and pick a spot where I'll have patched it. which I should be able to do a cross section, and even my cross section will be not necessarily accurate as far as being straight goes. So, but as far as the thing goes, it's just going to be interesting to be able to print it. You know, I don't feel as though what I'm doing is scientific. It's more creative and artistic, but hopefully it's of some use to somebody. So yeah, I'm basically going to try and patch up this inside piece and approximate, you know, what it should look like on the inside, and hopefully we can get something that's printable. Alrighty then, let's get into it. So let's bring back our view cube for a second. Object browser rather. For some reason I can't make this little bastard move out of my way, which is going to be annoying. Alright, so we'll patch this up. We'll patch up the little holes first. And I'm just going to unmute Ben while I do that because this is pretty boring work.
To manufacture objects like this. It's vastly more challenging to work in this sort of medium than it would be to work in something more homogeneous like steel or aluminium. Granite and igneous stones are made up of matrices of different material with very different hardnesses. Inclusions of extremely hard material like quartz or corundum are surrounded by far softer stuff like mica or hornblende. This represents a huge challenge to the machining process, as the tooltip needs to go from soft to hard and back again as it works the surface. You also run the risk of literally ripping out chunks of material as you work it.
So you'll see
For example, a quartz inclusion is much harder than the material surrounding it, and it might...
Just pause that for a sec. So these holes that I'm patching, you'll see, it's not going to do a perfect job of patching. It's approximating from the edges what it thinks it should look like. Well, what was that? I'll undo that. That might be a necessary piece. Got to be careful not to do that. See, there's an auto repair all button, but if I hit that, it's going to delete pieces that we actually probably want to keep. See, there's purple guys. We don't want to lose them. And I've accidentally undone one of my repair jobs, but that's okay. We'll go in and do this again. And I'll put Ben back on and keep going.
Might shatter entirely or just be ripped out of the matrix rather than being cut cleanly. Either the tool itself is so rigidly held in place and so effective that it doesn't matter what material it's carving through, or the force that's exerted on the tool tip needs to vary at an almost microscopic level with the material to get the results that we see. Neither solution seems remotely feasible with any sort of primitive handwork. It really does bend my mind thinking about what this vase represents. Okay, before I share with you all some more of my discussion with professional metrologists Nick Sierra and Alex Dunn, as well as the Vase owner Adam Young, let's discuss a couple more things that have come up since the last video came out. I titled that video, Changing the Game for Ancient Precision, and it really does reflect what I think this work represents. As far as I know, this is the first time an ancient object like this has been subjected to this level of scrutiny, and I hope that it's just the start, as this sort of analysis is sorely needed for many more ancient artifacts, both large and small. I also expected the video would generate a reaction from the so-called debunkers and also from mainstream archaeology, and I definitely saw some of that. The responses, however, went pretty much exactly as I predicted that they would. First, question the provenance of the vase. Then, attack my motives, or the motives of the people involved, or just stoop all the way down to ad hominems, sadly an all too common occurrence as evidenced by the ridiculous statements made recently against Graham Hancock in relation to his Netflix show, Ancient Apocalypse. Failing all that, some people just hand-wave it and dismiss it away all as nonsense, which only serves to show just how ignorant they are when it comes to engineering topics. As I predicted though, these types of responses really only serve to just throw up an objection in order to avoid dealing with the Vase scan and precision data. And when it comes to any objection or coherent responses to this data, it's been radio silence. Granted, it's still early days, so we'll see, but the challenge for experimentalists is definitely out there. Go download the STL file, then get your sticks and stones together, document your process, and let's compare results. Good luck. The only one of these arguments or objections that are worth commenting on any further is that around the provenance of the vase as a pre-dynastic object, at least 5,000 years old, and possibly, even probably, I think, much older. When this objection on provenance comes from mainstream archaeologists, as I saw it did, I find the...
So just so that you guys know what I'm doing here, I've just made all of the triangles around the edges of this smaller, which I've actually divided them in half, so I haven't changed any shape at all there, but what I have done, oops, turn it around, is now be able to patch these smaller chunks around the edges. I just want to get this kind of all nice, nice and patched up as good as I can before I go on any further and try and sort of recreate the other sides of it, etc. I possibly won't even end up using the internals. I might end up just creating a shell from the outside, which will completely ruin any ability to measure anything, but we'll see. What are we after? Analysis, inspector. Now some of those holes that weren't patchable before will be patchable. At least one of them. Maybe that was a waste of time. Yeah, I was expecting better than that. Yeah, it's pretty ragged. We might just have to lose some of those fragments. Actually, I know what's going on. Some of those bits are separate. Oh no. Those are the other bits anyway. Righto, so let's see. Let's just make that bit not transparent anymore. Get rid of the wireframe. Now, what I reckon, well, one thing I can say for sure is that it's annoying that it's upside down. I'm just going to grab everything and just do a full 180 with it. So it's the right way up. Should have done that in the first place. But there we go. Alright, now let's play with taking a copy of this bit. We'll hide that bit. And we'll grab that copy and shrink it. See, it's not the same exact shape when shrunk, or maybe it just needs to be moved up or down. We can play with that a little bit. It's kind of getting pretty close. There's a lot of areas where it overlaps. It's not quite doing it, but that will probably serve functionally as an inside for this pot. Probably. Then that could be the outside. Join up with that other one. I reckon that's probably the best shot. Now, especially if this was a uniform thickness, that's sort of at least going to look somewhat good. I'm just going to accept that for a sec. I don't know. I can't think of a better way to fix that up. I mean, we could try and patch that other side and make it symmetrical, but I just don't think we're going to be able to get it on center as accurately as the actual artifact is. So anything I do, I might jag it and get it correct, but it'll be just as likely that I'll jag it and make it correct when it never was in the first place, or vice versa. So I think that, yeah, like I said, they were probing it in this video. Let's just go back to watching the actual video. I may have talked over that bit, so watch it for yourself. But I did see them with a little pin probe machine. So this scan is probably from a different scanner, like a structured light scanner or something, and the pin probe would be its own thing. So any measurements they're talking about possibly aren't from this, and any analysis they do in this video. I can't verify with this model that they have enough data to be able to... I mean, they could only measure from the points that they do have in there. And even looking at that with the scan, an object like that, when you're trying to scan something that's cylindrical, if you've got a repeating shape, that could actually be the same chunk of scan just repeating itself over and over again on the inside anyway. So even their scan may not be accurate. It may literally just be the same chunk of vase. Like on the outside, I'd believe it because it's got the handles to locate itself off. And I don't know whether they use sticky dots or not. But yeah, looking at the inside of that pot, there's every chance that that repeating pattern that we can actually see that repeating pattern there, and we could look and see if we can identify any bumps on there that are indicative of it repeating itself. I don't know, it's a bit hard to say. Maybe the bumps are a bit unique. You know, there's those two little bumps there. Sort of don't see... We're not seeing an exact repeating dint over and over again, but then it's a bit hard to say. I don't know. Could probably do this actually. Makes it a bit easy to see. Go away. Anyway, so yeah, look, maybe these are unique bits. I can't be certain. Maybe some of these bumps on this bigger section are repeated bits of that. Chances are it's legit. You know, there is some texture on there, so maybe it was able to see that properly and follow the scan the whole way around. I just do know that sometimes when I'm scanning things, if you've got something like I did a jam jar, for example, and the thread kept on repeating itself, and the jar was the same all the way around, and it kept on getting munted up. So just keep that in mind with that internal scan may have been just repeating itself. Anyway, I'll just undo that flippity flip.
The hypocrisy to be utterly palpable. It's akin to somebody setting up their own roadblock and then complaining that it stops them from driving down the road. It is quite literally the academics in mainstream Egyptology who have denied countless requests to analyse and study these objects. And it's the same people who have also expressed zero interest in exploring the engineering or manufacturing of artifacts like these vases themselves.
And some of the experts just don't seem that interested.
If you're asking about the analysis of the inside of the vases, we only dealt with the contents. We haven't worked on the techniques used to make the vases.
Ancient Egyptian museum curators are generally also Egyptologists, and archaeologists control the access to ancient sites and artifacts, and they get to decide who can do what and when. If you want to question the provenance of this vase, then please, let's analyse any of the hundreds of examples currently ensconced in display cabinets gathering dust, those with impeccable provenance. It's a harmless process, and you'd be advancing our knowledge base as well as preserving and digitizing the artifact for all time, regardless of whatever motive you think might be behind it. It's this very reason, this denial of access to these artifacts, that our only option to do this type of work so far has been to go out to private collectors. Regarding this vase, I'm very confident of its provenance. It's been in private collection, as far as I know, since the 1980s, and I'd question our capability to make this sort of thing with this level of precision in the 1980s. Even machining this today from granite would represent a significant challenge. As I showed in the last video, the vase matches the shape, size, and form of many examples of pre-dynastic or early dynastic vases in the Cairo Museum. Many examples that, to the eye at least, display the same characteristics of the scanned vase and would be entirely worthy subjects for a deeper inspection. This is a pre-dynastic vase, and we'll come back to the provenance topic later on in the video. Also, just quickly to address the several people who saw fit to complain in the comments section that this data is being presented in the imperial measurements rather than in metric, just a reminder that the Vase report is and has been available in both imperial and metric on my website. Personally, I just get tired of having to repeat every measurement in both systems, which I do take the time to do in many of my videos. I don't find it too difficult to understand both systems, and personally, just saying a thousandth of an inch is much easier and cleaner than constantly repeating 0.028 of a millimeter. But again, the metric report is available, and now the STL file is also, so feel free to download it and make your own measurements in whatever system you like. Lastly, I want to restate the request that goes out to anyone who has access to or owns objects like this vase, even curators who are looking after collections. We would love to scan more artifacts and build up a body of work. Not only will scanning ancient artifacts lead to more knowledge about their creation, it's also a service for future generations by preserving and documenting these vases digitally. Please do reach out to me if you're willing or interested in having artifacts scanned. Our team is well connected with organizations around the world with the appropriate equipment to make it happen. The rest of this video is additional discussion and context from my talk with Alex, Nick, and Adam. I was going to just put the full chat up in this video, but I realized it would be repeating a lot of the content that was in the last one, which focused directly on the vase analysis. In this chat, we get into more of the vase's background, the nature of precision, what the results mean, and how metrology techniques could be applied to other sites and objects. So before I let it roll, just a quick reminder about some of my upcoming trips and appearances. In June, I'll be speaking at the Cosmic Summit alongside scientists and luminaries like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Attendance in person is now sold out, but the live stream is still available, and the link to that is below. In July of this year, 2023, I'll be visiting the ancient sites of England for the first time, along with my good friends Yusuf Awen and Hugh Newman, and there are still a few spots available for that trip. Do you have any details about where it came, where it was found, or its history at all?
So most of the ones that you see in private collection or that come up for auction or for sale, typically the story is it's a European family. There is generally some sort of diplomatic connection where in the 1800s there was some sort of ambassador or diplomatic relation from that country to Egypt. Normally what happens is the family is selling, there's an estate sale or something, nobody really sees the value in it, and it ends up at auction or through a collector or an auctioneer or someone like that. So there's provenance and then there's pseudo-provenance. What typically the more provenance, the more valuable, and they may end up in museums first. And so it's not always that easy, even if there is provenance, because of the fear of the government coming back and claiming these. It's sometimes a little bit murky and you just don't see it all that often. But my understanding is that a lot of these originally came from Saqqara. At least my personal belief is that the Egyptians themselves, probably the dynastic Egyptians, and pre-dynastic Egyptians found these things. They probably dug them up on and around Saqqara. They seem to have been heirlooms. So you'll normally, when the academics have the reason they've coined these pre-dynastic is because they were found in pre-dynastic burials.
That's right.
And you can carbon date the fossilized or the remains of whoever was buried there. You would normally have seen maybe one of these high precision. They're generally granite or diorite or hard rock, igneous rock vessels, along with maybe 20 or 30 less impressive pottery vases. And so that kind of tells me that this was an heirloom.
Yep.
It was probably buried with a matriarch or a patriarch of the family, and they were recognized even in deep antiquity for being really precise and impressive. It's also very interesting that they're recognized as being pre-dynastic, right? That puts that straight line kind of evolution into question.
Yeah, that's even, funnily enough, even though they've closed the museum at Saqqara, and it's kind of weird that it wasn't until after I'd started publishing videos showing what they were saying in the museum.
Just so you know, guys, I'm just waiting for my computer to actually do shit, and it's not showing it on the screen, so just listen away to these guys yabbering along.
At Saqqara about this, that they kind of closed the museum for renovations, or there's a big hole, like there's something underneath where the museum is, and there's a hole in the floor. It had been there for a long time, but for whatever reason, the last couple of years, they've closed that museum. But in that museum, when they talk about the hardstone vases, that's literally what they say, that these are heirlooms from earlier times. They don't claim that Djoser, the owner, the pharaoh of the step pyramid, under which there's 40 to 50,000 of them were found. They don't claim that he had them made or they were his. He said he likely recovered these from earlier tombs. And they pretty much just say, well, everything was made either the first or second dynasty. So I think they get half of that right in terms of the inheritance scenario and this heirloom scenario, but they're just not going potentially far back enough, because you can find a lot of stuff that is, as you say, legitimately found in pre-dynastic burials that maybe Djoser's dudes didn't find to have buried with him. There's a whole raft of these examples that go back a long way into time. So we don't really know when they were made, but that combined with the other fact that these more or less disappear from the Egyptian record or from their manufacturing after the 3rd and 4th dynasty. It's a couple of exceptions, generally because there's some poorly made hieroglyph on it that associates it with a ruler of a later period. But they generally disappear from the record after that real early time. So it's like it's hard to say exactly when these were made, but it seems like whoever made them, that capability existed either very early on or before dynastic Egypt did, and then it just disappeared after that, because all the vases that happened after that was what I think Imhotep, who was the architect for Djoser, he's the guy who designed the step pyramid, and I think he came up with a procedure to kind of replicate them and imitate them in alabaster. So we see this from then on. It's mostly these beautiful alabaster vases. Obviously, a result of handwork, they became a high art form, but they don't seem to at all show the same symmetry, precision, thickness of material, and those sort of characteristics that we find in the igneous stone vessels. So there's a whole kind of interesting connection where I think these vases are kind of like a real smoking gun to something else going on early on, and then it's like a capability that disappeared.
I wonder, have you seen any literature that indicates what Imhotep or those Egyptians were doing to carve the alabaster? Do we have any idea about how long it took them? Well,
there's not so much how long they took them. There is a scene on the wall. So there was this is one of the things that always gets thrown up as a here's how they did it. So they show you there's one particular scene. It's in the museum at Saqqara. I talk about it in a couple of my videos, but it shows that they had because again, you also have to remember that they don't credit. I mean, the mainstream Egyptology does not credit the Old Kingdom with the use of the wheel or the lathe. They don't say any of that was involved. So, but what you do see is these like crooked sticks with like a flint tip on the end, and then weights on either side that they would rotate over a vase. And then there's pictures of guys like working on them with just hand stones and things. And there's this one scene, and they sort of point at this and say, "See, this is how they made all of them." They haven't particularly found any of these tools, but it is a drawing of it. But it's just definitely like a hand rotating sort of counterweight system where they would bore out the centers of these things and then say that they made the rest of them that way. So yeah, that's generally the explanation you get. And I think doing things like this where you can define the precision that's inherent in some of these things, and then specifically kind of show how precise that is in terms of relative geometries of parts of the vase to each other, where it just none of that's possible with these techniques. And to me it's like this tale of two industries. You have one industry that's that's primitive with these primitive hand tools, and we have a bunch of artifacts that are explained by that. And I think
Righto, I'm back. Hopefully that wasn't too boring.
that's what the scene on the wall shows. And I think it's basically imitation. They're looking at, I think those guys saw these vases and were like, what the hell is this? And amazed by them. They were immediately valuable. They understood what they were looking at, and they tried to imitate them. And then you have this other category of artifacts that isn't explainable by the primitive tools or by the methods that we see drawn on these scenes on the walls. One other thing I'd mention here is, that I meant to mention before, is the imitation part. Even in the museum, you see that, like you said, they were found in these old pre-dynastic burials, and next to them were these very unimpressive pottery samples. I got a few pictures of this because this is literally how they're displayed in the museum. It's amazing. You have a very hard-looking, a very precise igneous stone vessel, whether it's diorite, porphyry, whatever, and next to it's like a pottery vase, not spun, not made on a lathe, put together with hand, and then it's painted, and they put dots on it to make it look like granite. Like it's so clear that it's imitation.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
even in the alabaster, you can see because I have a few of those too.
Yep.
They're not perfect. They're from far away. They look round. When you get up close, you see that they're very far from being precise circles.
Yeah.
They're off center. The bases, the bases are not perfectly flat, so they don't sit perfect with the ground.
Right.
They don't sit perpendicular with the surface that they're on. There's quite a big difference, and so that I think what you're saying is spot on with the imitation versus the original.
Yeah, Nick and Alex. So let me get back to kind of the precision discussion we were having earlier. One of the things that I've always maintained, and I think this holds true from a theoretical perspective, is that there's, and this was going back to what you were saying, Nick, is that there's a relationship, I think, between precision and function. Like there's you don't develop the type of precision that we see in these parts, nor like in the aerospace parts or any number of parts of the semiconductor industry, things like that. There's a return on the cost. When you develop precision down to these levels, right? That you do that, and you develop a manufacturing process that can support that because you're chasing a return on function. I mean, do you agree with that? Is that something that you guys do day in, day out kind of thing? That's why we do that.
Yeah. It's really what we call design intent. Right, because the whole idea of how we do things in the modern world is you take a CAD system, you design something, and then when you do that, that is what we call nominal geometry. That's what it should look like if it's perfect. And we know we can't make anything perfect, but when you design that, this part is functionally very important. This part is important, but doesn't really functionally do something that we need to make sure it's perfect. So you take those tolerances and you apply them to different areas and different things because you have to have that accuracy in this feature. But one of the interesting things is that once you get to the point where you have the accuracy for those features, why not apply that accuracy to everything, right? That's well within your capability.
Yep.
It doesn't make it any more difficult to do.
Right.
So you do that because it makes a better part.
That's exactly where I was going to go with this, because I've made this argument about precision and function, and I think from, at least in my perspective and the way I look at it, I think there are objects and artifacts that come to us from some of these early times that may well have a functional purpose. Now, in particular, I'm talking about boxes and maybe even some of the architecture and sites themselves. They seem to have, to me at least, I think you don't need to have this precision unless there's function, but it becomes more difficult to explain a function when you talk about a statue or a vase or something that is relatively artistic and decorative. But as you said, if you've developed a manufacturing process that can deliver this sort of function, then that's kind of what you get, right? That's if you're using that to do this work, then you get this level of precision. We kind of do this now, right? The car panel parts on modern cars are much tighter and the tolerances are much closer because our manufacturing processes support it. Is it really necessary? Probably not, but it's a result of our manufacturing processes.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that would be the strongest argument for the nature of the precision in these vases,
and
is that the tool is incapable of producing anything less precise. So you know that whichever rotating tool was being used to sculpt this piece has the accuracy to maintain this geometry. But then that dives into the next question is also with manufacturing, we also need verification.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly the Egyptians were holding these tolerances consistently, and they had to have had a separate system as well to verify. The precision that we see in this vase, especially with the lug handles, isn't obtainable by hand. And if being done with a machine tool, how were they also simultaneously making sure that they were being held to within a thousandth of an inch, like we're seeing with the scanner?
Yeah, the verification. Got it. Yeah, and in fact, and we'll dive into the vase details in a second here, but I think there's another implication that is really interesting to me is that if you're using this manufacturing process and given that it's not doable by hand, it's like you can also maybe assume that this thing was designed. Like at some point somebody designed this. It's not like there's a craftsman eyeballing this and making it up as he goes along, as you might do on a pottery wheel or in some other, like a stone carving thing where I'm gonna shape this according to the rock and what I see in it. This, to me, it's like this had to have kind of been designed, and maybe that's also another explanation for the perfectness that we see in, you know, the lug handles relative to each other and the top of the vase. So it's some crazy implications when you get into it on this vase.
Increasing our volume of scans will be what would be the most important piece of determining whether or not this was a standard piece, if they had a process in place to continuously replicate this particular piece.
Right.
One that would really, for me, be the smoking gun of sorts would be able to scan each Ramses head.
Yep.
And overlay the scans to see if they are all identical as we assume them to be.
Yeah, or suspect at least. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this vase in particular, before we dive into the specifics of the scans and the nature of the precision and what you found on different surfaces, I kind of wanted to touch on the stone itself, because Nick, you made a comment earlier about, we make a lot of these precision parts today out of material like steel, composite materials that are very uniform in nature, and I guess that helps into kind of maintaining tolerances and stuff, but not so when it comes to things like granite and igneous rock, right? These things are not uniform structures. They're conglomerates. You have quartz, mica, hornblende, materials of different hardness inside of the matrix itself. So what does it say? Like, what does it, do you guys draw any conclusions from the fact that you're seeing this in a material like granite and how difficult that might be?
Yeah, for me, with the on the piece itself, you can see the tool marks. You can see what Flinders describes in his writings, and my father as well. You can see the evidence of a single point turn in the material. And with the material properties consistently changing the way that they do in granite, it can be assumed, we don't have evidence, we're not there, but just pure speculation, that they were continuously changing their tool pressure and speed to be able to hold these tolerances as they cut the material, which brings into a whole nother discussion of the level of their tool technology. So you can look at someone, finally being able to say, okay, maybe they had a simple lathe, but also it has the evidence, the visual evidence of it being cut at a high speed with high pressure. If it were to be done slowly on a potter's wheel by hand, we wouldn't have the deep tool impressions that we see in the material, especially if being done with a soft metal.
Right. Yeah, and I know this vase probably isn't it's still like a relatively thick surface, but I mean, you can go into the museum today and see some very thin igneous stone vessels, and Petrie measured one that he found that went down to 1/40th of an inch. Like that's when you're dealing with these crystal occlusions and this type of material, it gets really brittle when it gets thin like that. Is just I don't know how to explain it. Like it's almost inconceivable to me that you could carve this type of material with quartz and then mica and whatever else in it, and large crystal inclusions down to that thinness is remarkable.
You'll see vases even in the British Museum with large crystalline structures within granite. Like I sent you an image of like corundum and granite, and it's interesting with the yes, it does go down very thin, but then the curvature is also maintained across the piece too. So
Yep.
especially the more heterogeneous the substance, you'll see the curvature is maintained throughout both, both substrates, and one might be very different in terms of like hardness, like where corundum's like a 9 on the Mohs scale, I
Yep.
think. And so, what kind of a tool is able to seamlessly go through multiple different types of medium like that and maintain the exact same curvature and tolerance effectively is beyond me. But you'll see some of the same materials like replicated over and over again, meaning they probably all came from, a select number of quarries.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the same. Yeah, that it is remarkable. And I think there even is a mostly corundum vase in the museum somewhere. But we saw the same thing. And my friend Yusuf in Egypt, when we go down beneath the step pyramid, I've been down there a couple times, and where they found all these things. And there's still fragments of these vases everywhere down there. So it's kind of unique in that you get to handle a lot of that stuff. And there are fragments of plates or dishes, not so much the vases, but the more plate-oriented stuff. And it's just the tapering, the way that it's this these big fragments of this stuff, and it's just this ultra consistent tapering of that material, so it sort of starts thicker and thinner, thinner, thinner out to the edge. That's just consistent across the whole thing. It's just a whole other sign of it. So they're able to maintain that tapering across a wide area and just thin that material out, no problem, in ridiculously hard stone. So yeah, it's a lot that needs a bit more explanation and analysis, I think. Let's get into the vase then. So you guys scanned it. Maybe talk a little bit about, if you can, the machine and the technology used to scan it. What you were doing, how you're mapping geometric shapes to different parts of the vases, and what we're seeing with some of these results. And feel free to share screen here, or I can add the images in and stuff afterwards. Either way.
So Adam had arranged to have the vase scanned through a company called Capture 3D out of Connecticut. And I believe they used a GOM ATOS scanner, which is a pretty standard structured light scanner used in manufacturing. It carries an accuracy of about 1,000th of an inch, which is more than accurate than we would need for a project like this. No one's following calibration rules on ancient artifacts yet. So.
Yeah, no, that's the other interesting part too that we'll get into with these. I know because you talked about the handles, because it's not all made on a lathe. Obviously, I get so many comments about like, oh, the handles. I'm like, yeah, I understand. There's some other process involved in making.
If we were to do this today, we'd have to do it on a 5-axis mill turn, right, where lathe cut the shape, leave the handles, and then we'd have to go in and finish between them with a mill while maintaining that ellipsoid geometry, which is incredibly difficult to do. Because one tool to another is going to have error in the cut, and this vase exhibits almost none. So,
okay, and these are the lug handles here. All right, so you've got, and this is what, parallelism to surface A, perpendicularity to surface B, and then the same thing for lug handle A and B, and you're down in the single-digit thous.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. The lug handles, while functionally are the most impressive part of the piece, geometrically they're also the most impressive part of the piece. So lug handle 1, which is designated datum F, and it's designated datum F so that we can relate the parallelism of the lug handle on the other side to it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll see in the feature control frame here on the right that that is its relationship to lug handle
7,000.
Yes.
And those are cylinders made out of thousands of points.
Yeah, I think the point count should be up there.
Like
4,200 on one and 3,800. So, your typical CMM, we would probably only take 6 to 8 points. So the fewer points you take, honestly, the more accurate your geometry is going to appear. But once again, we want to be as thorough as we can in our investigations, and taking 4,000 points still isn't hurting.
No,
very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the more, like you said, you want to be honest about it, and the more data you get, I guess, the more tolerance, I guess, you can see. That's
I mean, we could fudge, not fudge, but we could make decisions to make the geometry appear more precise than it is, but the precision of it already is, I think, enough to prove our point.
Yeah, and what really gets interesting here, and more to Alex's point of you know, turning this thing and then grabbing another tool and then coming back with precision is and accuracy is the fact that when you look at these, not only related to themselves, 7,000s parallel to each other across the vase, but in relation to that top flat, they are parallel to it within a few thousands. And they're perpendicular to the inside of that vase, the datum B, as we designated it, within a few thousands.
Within a human hair.
Wow.
Within a human hair, they're perpendicular to that center cylinder.
That's the holes in the center of the lug handles. That's what you're talking about here?
Actually, the outside of the lugs.
Okay.
Constructed into cylinders, yeah.
Okay.
So when we had this in the shop, we had it on a row tab. I think I may have told you about this, Ben, and we had a 5/10 graduation indicator, and we had zeroed it out on one of the lug handles and just simply spun the vase 180 degrees to the other lug handle, and that indicator, I have a video on my phone, that indicator zeroed out, and that was sitting, you know, under its own weight on the bottom of the vase. So the bottom plane of the vase is also extremely flat. We weren't able to get a scan of it, but technology has gotten even better in the last, you know, 4 years since this was scanned. So
wow, 4 years. I didn't know you'd been. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We've been sitting on this for a while, and we would like to, you know, use the latest on this vase as well. As long as we have access to it, we want to increase our knowledge of it when technology allows.
Okay.
For all of it, I think even the flatness of the Serapeum has come under question.
So I hope everyone's finding this interesting in between watching the stuff that I'm doing popping up. So yeah, basically I'm just in the middle of just trying to get this thing so that you can print it with somewhat vase-like walls. But again, like I said, I'm basically recreating the internal walls as closely as I can to what it should be, but it's not really ideal what I'm doing. I've possibly lifted or lowered it because the center point would have been different. I couldn't just shrink it straight in because it didn't line up, although maybe it would have if I had just sized it exactly right. I'm not sure. I guess I could try that again, but I won't. So there you go. I'll just put my camera down a bit. Yeah, so again, I was hoping to do this cross-section thing, but I don't think there's any point doing it because it's not going to be accurate because I've essentially fudged the inside wall. So cancel that idea. I'll leave that up to somebody else, or possibly if they can give me some more data, we can do something with that. But like once I've given this files to Ben, hopefully he'll actually receive them. He doesn't know me. I'm just some random to him. I just liked his videos. So yeah, basically, now we're just going to smooth this join here. So yeah, as you'll see, you know, like this is sort of only approximately lining up there. This is all guesswork, and then it approximately lines up there. So this lumpy ridge here shouldn't really be there. There's lots of stuff that's not going to be quite right here. What I'm actually going to do now is make a few plain cuts that are just going to divide it up into some groups. Whoops. And give that a bit of a smooth. So yeah, as we can see, we're feathering this in. It is not accurate. Do not try and measure this and prove the accuracy of this artifact based off this 3D model that I'm creating. I'm actually going to reduce that section and try smoothing that again. Smoothing seems to work better with bigger triangles to an extent. I think I might remesh it as well. Maybe remeshing would have been a better choice in the first place. Now let's try smoothing that section again. I'll just expand my selection beyond that just a bit. It's weird that it's gone that colour. I don't like it. I don't know why it does that sometimes. Seems to do it when things have come from scans. Anyway, it looks pretty smooth to me. Let's do the same thing up here. There was already some face groups on this, but I lost them. I'm trying to keep it. Let's just have a quick look at this. I'll actually do a big reduce in a second on this whole model because there's really no need for that internal part to have that many triangles. It is the unseen section. I'm going to press play again on the video, sorry.
At times, and it's just silly to me. So
Yeah, it's come up. I've had some long email exchanges with your dad about it. About the Serapeum. Yeah, no, there's been a couple of guys that go in there, take some fun. So I have been learning a lot more about the Serapeum in recent visits. Like, not all the boxes are finished.
On the inside?
On the inside, yeah, not all of them. And some of them, I've got corners that aren't quite finished. There's some other interesting things going on in there, though. Like, which maybe speaks to whatever functionality it was, but we were noticing that where there was either divots or imperfections on the inside surfaces, to our eye, it looked like they matched something that was happening on the outside. So it was almost as if like the thickness of the edge of the box was more important. So if there's like a lump on the inside, it corresponded to like a scoop on the outside, and then vice versa in a couple places.
Yeah, I did very not notice that. That is interesting.
Yeah, and we documented a bunch of it on the last trip, and I'm trying to think my way through it. It's almost like, and it's just like, it's almost like, yes, if they could do it and keep the box solid and keep it flat and square, they would do that. But then the reason there was all those scoop marks, like they're removing cracks, they're emptying cracks in the material. I also wonder if that's not a reason why they were polishing them so well, is to actually show up imperfections in the stone and cracks in the same way you might do with metal, right? You polish it to look for imperfections and cracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they remove it. And it's like solidity seems to be a goal there. Like they went to great lengths to...
They had a mechanical purpose, yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing that we do with castings for, these turbine blades.
Yeah.
Get a cast part in, and you send it through an X-ray machine
to look for cracks and checks. Yeah.
For cracks internally, voids, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's a mechanical part that's under a lot of stress and heat and pressure and all that stuff.
I don't know why else they would care if they had a little crack in it. You know, if you're putting some dead balls in there and putting the lid on it, who cares? You don't need it to be square and flat or shiny on the inside. I mean, it just doesn't. None of that explanation really holds much water for me. But it's And anyway, so there was some guys that have gone in there and trying to debunk some of that stuff, and they're measuring like outside angles on the box too. That's one, as I've told people, if ever you see a video where the guys are measuring the outside angles on these boxes and saying, "See, it's not 90 degrees." Well, no, they weren't chasing that. And then you have like odd angles of these photographs where they're like, they're not measuring like square in the inside. They're tilting the digital protractor and not zeroing it and whatever. And I know your dad's a fan with Ahmed Adley, who I've talked to as well, and he's gone in and done a bunch of measurements to show that, well, yes, there are plenty of places where it is at least to within the tolerances of that digital protractor 90 degrees. I mean, there's always going to be people that...
The one that my dad is most famous for in his book, that is the white whale of sorts. That's my number one focus for scanning and measurement.
What's that? The box or the Ramsey's head?
The box. The box with it looks like they almost used explosives to get into it.
Well, they did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought that was the story. I didn't want to speak, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. That's the one that I think has the most precise surfaces that needs the most investigation.
Yep. Yeah, that was Marriott's work. He wasn't the only one to use dynamite or gunpowder or whatever he was using. Yeah. Okay.
It is interesting how some folks will enter the field without a full understanding of measurement accuracy, precision. With this project, I don't want to fall into the fantasy that some tend to do when investigating these artifacts, because the truth is more important than what we may believe these people were doing, and we have to build to that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've said it a few times. Like, I don't mind if I get proven completely wrong with all of my theories that my speculation that I put out there in some of the videos. As long as it gets us closer to the truth, that's fine.
Yeah, that's how science works. I'm wrong all day, every day, and then I go.
Yeah.
The other thing I had a thought of that I was kind of thinking about just recently was the scoop marks.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Measuring the scoop marks.
I'd love to measure the scoop marks.
Well, I have scanned quite a bit of them, and it's just that, again, that LiDAR scanning on the iPad's not exactly accurate, but it's sufficient enough to measure not too bad, like a lot of the marks. And I mean, I have a bunch of models of them. When I tried to look at them, I have a whole video on the scoop marks. It seemed that, so they do vary in size, but in most areas they're pretty consistent in that area. So there's whatever tool was making that, it does seem like, okay, they're different shaped buckets or whatever.
I want to see the transitional, and maybe you and I can look at this at another time, Ben, but I want to see, if you can send me that data, the transition between when they're cutting the sides and then the area that gets underneath.
Yep.
Because in us, for machinists, we're very concerned with tool change, and perhaps even just like if whatever was cutting it picked up a different cutting tool as well.
It's one of the strangest things to me is against the whole pounding stone mark, is that you have...
I know, like they're going to get underneath there.
Pounding up to start with. But you have between the scoop mark lines, so and in some places they articulate too. So you'll see them like this, and then they articulate as if the tool was anchored somewhere. And then they articulate further and further. You see it in a couple spots like that.
Right.
I'd like to see if there is another
There's
axis.
definitely something going on.
Yeah, well, it's exactly.
There's no way they were made.
That's kind of where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Is if you're able to scan the scoop mark in entirety, we can look at that in terms of transition points, right? The geometry and where tangential
breaks are in that.
Very interesting.
And construct, okay, this sphere or whatever we're going to call it, a torus most likely, really has a center point here, and then this one has a center point over here. So I mean, there's interesting stuff to look at with that, because you could show that there's legitimately, I mean, as you move through a scoop that's continuous, that the center point of that rotation is moving.
Okay. Yeah, I'll totally share all that data I've got with you. Again, it's iPad data, so it's not.
Yeah, that's fine. We can bring it in and at least rough inspection. But yeah, I think.
But the one thing I'll say about the scoop marks is too, like on some of the walls, like on that little obelisk chunk where it goes underneath it, you go like from 15 feet above, you have a very consistent like ridge line. So between each scoops, it's this consistent ridge line runs all the way down the wall, then along the floor, then back under and onto the underside of the lip. So it's like this. You have this straight line of these scoops, which is one of the whole things. I'm like, that's not what you'd get if you were pounding on this with stones. Even if you pound out a scoop, the next thing you're going to start doing is pounding out the high spots, and you're going to hit that ridge line because that's where you'll chip off the most stuff. You just wouldn't have these consistent ridge lines that define each scoop, because sometimes you just see a scoop on the surface, but in some places you see where it's run all the way down the wall, along the floor, then up and under the obelisk. It's like a straight, consistent line. So it's like, I don't know what's going on there, but okay.
Yeah, I think those are very interesting in terms of how the heck
did
that happen.
Baseball-sized diorite pounding stones.
That's right.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Or bigger even, it's like 10 pounders. It's just like that. Do that for an hour, see how you feel.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel great.
The other thing I really, really want to explore, if we can do this, it would be awesome, would be in the Serapeum, as you were saying, wondering if the scoops on the outside, or if the wall thickness is consistent, because that would be another thing that we can measure and look at, and that would be really interesting to see.
It would be
really interesting to see.
Yep, we've got a lot of data on the Serapeum, still got to get it all together, and we had a couple people scanning different parts. It's tough to scan with the LiDAR because those things are so shiny in places. You just get, it's shit, but you just get reflections. And
we were talking about, we have to switch up our instruments based on what the the presumed accuracy of the artifact is. And I don't even think, I've talked about this with Nick earlier this week, I don't even think 3D scanning is what's most appropriate for the Serapeum. Like, we'll do the 3D scanning, but to actually pull the true geometric accuracy, we need a laser. Like an interferometer, because I expect those walls, especially on the one that my dad inspected, to be within tenths. So we can't use an instrument with an accuracy of 1,000. We're going to have to get tighter than that.
Okay.
The scanning would be for
just to have it,
a digital copy of it.
I mean, that's the grand purpose that I think that's the thing that I think we can sell people on the most, is like, hey, whether or not you support what we're trying to do, the points that we're trying to prove, say something happens to Adam's vase, he's got the scan of it, that thing lives forever digitally, because
I'm gonna glue it back together if it does.
We'll scan it again and see how close you get. But just from a preservation aspect.
Once again, many thanks to Alex, Nick and Adam for their time, effort and generosity here. This is a topic that I'll be revisiting from time to time as we get updates, but for me it's back to business as usual now. I have a bunch of videos that I'm working on, including a detailed look at some of the amazing aspects of Karnak Temple, and a full report from our visit to the rarely seen Sphinx Temple. And I think we were some of the only people to get in there in recent decades, and I filmed all of it. It was an incredible privilege, intensely interesting, and you're seeing some of that footage here now. Also, thank you to everyone who's recently subscribed to or viewed the channel. The last couple of months have seen some really great growth. Maybe that's just the power of Rogan, but I hope
just find the original
When you and the team are pitching a new product, Grammarly's tone suggestions can offer a more personable approach to...
Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and today, this video is something that I'd hoped to make for quite some time. A detailed, defined, and professional analysis of the precision manufacturing that was used to create a truly ancient artifact. Our subject here is a stone vase from ancient Egypt, carved from a single block of igneous granite, dated to pre-dynastic Mesolithic times. That is to say, it's at least 5,200 years old and potentially much older than that. The details and analysis of this vase that you'll see in this video will demonstrate the irremediable truth of work involved in its manufacturing, the cold, hard facts of the geometric precision achieved in its creation. The implications of this truth on the debate around the existence of ancient high technology are utterly profound and entirely devastating to the orthodox claims that simple, primitive hand tools can explain everything that we see from this era in history. This is why this kind of work is just so important. It's an indication of significantly advanced technology, deployed and utilized in distant periods of our past. Periods today only associated with the very beginnings of human civilization. At the very least, evidence like this should force a rethink of what we think we know about the people and civilizations who lived in those times. But much more likely, I think it's a clue to a far longer timeline of our species, one that involves lost, ancient, and advanced civilizations that existed before the world-changing cataclysm of the Younger Dryas, or the periods that preceded it. Strong claims, you might say, but I think they're warranted here. So sit back, take this journey with me, look at the data yourself, and listen to the real expert metrologists who did the work, and as always, make up your own mind. If you're viewing this as a result of my recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, in which I briefly introduced the analysis of this vase, then welcome. Thanks for watching. Let's get into the details, and I hope you enjoy the rest of my channel. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly mention that I'll be speaking on the topic of ancient engineering at the upcoming Cosmic Summit 2023 conference, held June 17 and 18 at the Crowne Plaza Resort in Asheville, North Carolina. I'll be joined by several friends and colleagues, Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Jimmy Cassetti, and Snakebro Russ, amongst others. And we also have great representation from the scientific field, with the likes of Dr. Alan West, the director of the Cosmic Research Group, Dr. Andrew Moore, a past president of the Archaeological Institute of America, and Dr. Stephen Collins, the dig director of the fascinating Tel Al Hammam site in Jordan. It promises to be an epic event, a deliberate mix of speculators and authors with published and credentialed scientists. The conference is fast approaching sellout for in-person tickets, but it will also be live-streamed and available for online replay. So if you're interested in the conference and would like to support my work, the livestream ticket is a great way to do just that. You can find all the details at howtube.com/unchartedx, and it's also linked below in the description. Also, quick mention, I'll be joining Hugh Newman, JJ Ainsworth, and my good friend Yusuf Awen for a tour of megalithic England this July, which will be my first chance to check all of that out. We just put this trip together, the details are all up on my website. Along the same lines, there's literally a couple of spaces left on my upcoming tour of ancient sites in Turkey, which happens this April. So if you're interested in either of those, all of the details are up on unchartedx.com. In many of my previous videos, probably most of them, I've called for exactly the type of work that is the subject of this video, applying our modern high-tech metrology and measurement tools to accurately define and analyze ancient artifacts, in particular those that display obvious signs of precision. I'm very happy to say that this is exactly what's happened here. I was contacted by Alex Dunn, Chris Dunn's youngest son, and his colleague Nick Sierra, who are both professional metrologists working in the aerospace industry. All right, Nick Sierra, Alex Dunn, thanks so much for taking a bit of time to chat with me about this stuff.
Yeah, no problem. Our pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to talk. I know we've been chatting about this a little bit in the past, and it was a topic the timing on it was amazing. I think you guys said the same thing. The fact that this came up a few weeks, a month or two before I had the chance to go on Rogan's show and get into it, and it was, for me, it was like the number one thing I really wanted to communicate, because looking at and the work you guys are doing with the vases and defining this precision is exactly the type of stuff I think we need in this field. So thank you for reaching out to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the shout out. That was very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. That whole experience was wild. But where we want to start, or at least for me, is first of all just like introduce yourselves. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you guys do professionally, why you're qualified to talk about this stuff, and how you have access to kind of the machinery and structured light scanners that you've used on this Vase.
Sure, excellent. I'll start off. So I'm probably most recognizable as you announced on Joe Rogan's show. I am Christopher Dunn's youngest son, Alex. I have been in the metrology field for about 10 years now, and I've used pretty much every style of instrument that is available to a metrologist, from CMMs to structured light scanners and laser scanners, all professionally in the aerospace field. The vase that was scanned is the property of a friend of ours, and he had it scanned through a company out in Connecticut named Capture 3D, and they used a GOM ATOS structured light scanner to produce the STL file, which Nick and I then did a full inspection in a software called Polyworks.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I came into this madness, if you will. Alex showed me this the scan, and he explained what he saw to me. And I have a degree in aeronautical engineering technology from Purdue, and I'm also a licensed aircraft mechanic. Fun fact. So I enjoy hands-on stuff. I enjoy theoretical stuff, and I've done CNC programming in machining, and then I'm also done programming for measurement equipment, everything. And so as my mind sees this, and I was just like, there's no way that this was done by hand. I mean, I've seen things cut in a CNC machine that are worse than this, and they're not even granite. So I dove right in and started applying that analytical side. And again, like Alex said, we used Polyworks to take and extract all these features from this scanned mesh, and the results that we saw were just you can't explain it except with a machine center or something of that nature that could have done this. And I will talk about that in depth a little later.
Yep. While in Egypt a few years back with his father, Alex met Adam Young, who happened to have a couple of ancient pieces in his possession, including this vase. Artifacts like this do come up for sale or auction from time to time, usually from estate sales or from private collections. And we're also joined by Adam Young. Adam.
That was that probe thing I was just talking about just then. Earlier, I spoke about that little... I've gone back too far, haven't I?
Adam Young. Adam, thank you so much for the time today. And just, I'd love to understand how you got involved in all of this. And we're also joined by Adam Young.
Talk about that in depth a little later.
Yep. While in Egypt a few years back.
So this rig here is a little probe that knows its own position and can detect the pressure and whatnot, I'm pretty sure. And they can detect how round something is on that by centering it. And so that's probably how they're measuring the insides of this, where I said you couldn't get the scanner into. So I'm not sure about that, but that's something that I can't tell you from this scan. And what I think I'll do is I might try and copy the original remaining bits on the inside and then kind of patch my bit as closely as possible to it, but make it so you can see where the original stuff is. So when someone's printing it, they can, they'll get a full vase, but they'll be able to see what the original scan could see, if that makes sense. We'll see. I'll have a look. Might do two versions.
Back with his father, Alex met Adam Young, who happened to have a couple of ancient pieces in his possession, including this vase. Artifacts like this do come up for sale or auction from time to time, usually from estate sales or from private collections. And we're also joined by Adam Young. Adam, thank you so much for the time today. And just, I'd love to understand how you got involved in all of this this topic, how you met these guys and how they got their hands on the vase and kind of led us to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, sure. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ben. Alex and I have known each other for a few years. We met through his father, of course, Chris. I've been to Egypt with Chris as well as as Robert Schock and some others, and had the pleasure of first going there a little over 10 years ago, and saw in the Egyptian Museum and the Cairo Museum, as well as at the sites, saw some of the precision in, I think, some of the largest structures and some of the smallest ones. And ever since then had kind of an eye for, recognizing it. And I think when you see these sorts of artifacts, like call it the vessels or the round ones, your eye can recognize kind of a perfect circle from a distance away. But once you get up close, the precision in comparison to maybe pottery or other types of vessels is really very clear. Of course, what we're seeking to do is to measure it at a more finite level and on a much more accurate scale. But in a museum behind plexiglass, even online in photographs, you can really recognize the extensive precision and work that must have went into to creating these. And so, for the past, I'd say 7, 8, 9 years, my wife and I have been kind of looking for, anytime we see artifacts through dealers or private collectors that are for sale, we take a look, and if it looks like it might be pre-dynastic or impressive in some way, we have been accumulating some of these things. So
awesome.
we probably have 40 or 50. They're not all as precise as the red or the rose granite vase that Alex and his colleagues took a look at a few years back. But there are a number of them.
My computer's frozen again. I'm just going to.
Saqqara alone, there was I think 40 or 50,000 found in numerous occasions. So it's these things. To me, when anybody asks, I say they they were kind of stacked up like Tupperware and forgotten. So that tells you that it probably was easy for someone to make at some point.
Yeah, indeed. Well, and first of all, I mean, a massive thank you for letting them get their hands on it as well and actually scan it, because this is exactly the kind of work that is needed, and in general, certainly I found museum curators and the mainstream museums really don't have a lot of interest in exploring the engineering aspects of some of these artifacts, because you can just look at them behind the glass cases, and I have the same observations as dozens of examples that I can name from the Cairo Museum alone, having been there a bunch of times, that should be subject to these types of scans. And I think, as we're finding out, when you find the ones that do, that are in the right shape, that seem to display those elements of precision, symmetry, all those types of things, it's astonishing the results that start to come out of it. So, I'm hopeful that the work you guys are doing and the results from this might trigger some more people that, potentially have some of these artifacts, and maybe even museum curators that might be willing to have some of these artifacts scanned, because at the end of the day, it's harmless, it's not going to hurt them at all, and we might actually end up learning something.
Some of them, we've seen reluctance from most academics, as you can imagine. Like, they already know the answers, so why keep looking? But I think it can vary, country to country, location by location. Some people are open-minded and recognize that, some of these may not have been done by hand. Even if they think it's a pottery wheel or something rudimentary, they may still be open to it. So I wouldn't, give up hope altogether.
Okay.
This game, you're not ready for it.
You're in the middle of this beautiful sci-fi environment, and you're seeing intrigue, the espionage, the alliances form, the power that just shifts around, and it's amazing to watch.
Right, this is primary, Julia, secondary.
Simple actions can have massive effects.
You can cooperate with people, compete with them, make friendships, deceive them, betray them.
It's amazing to think that it's all just other players.
More players start coming. It just starts this complete cascade of actions, and you don't know what's going to happen.
Here it comes. It is a free-for-all. We'll get locked up and shot instantly. People start dying left, right, and centre. It's just something that you can't get anywhere else. It's just the rush like no other.
All good.
Everybody's.
Sorry, everybody.
The vase in question is considered pre-dynastic. In other words, it was found in a tomb or burial dated to before Menes, the first pharaoh of the First Dynasty, which began around 3150 BC, more than 5,000 years ago. Pre-dynastic burials in Egypt go way back from that date, as far back as even 15,000 years ago, and artifacts like this vase or other igneous stone objects carved with what seem to be high degrees of precision have been found many times in those sites, and there are plenty of pre-dynastic examples on display in places like the Cairo Museum. I'd imagine that an easy criticism of this work might be around the provenance of the vase we're looking at. In other words, how do we know if it is really pre-dynastic? I'm personally confident that it is. It certainly matches the form and style of other pre-dynastic vases on display in museums, and it's made from the same rose granite as is the box in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. When we get into the scan results and the analysis of the precision that's evident in its construction, however, I think the question of provenance becomes moot, as it's so far beyond even the relatively primitive capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians, at least as we know them. It is worth understanding a bit more about how these types of artifacts get into circulation. You have to go back a couple hundred years to the times when Americans and Europeans, like the French, Germans, and English, were deeply involved in both governing and excavating Egypt. Many artifacts were given as gifts to officials, and others were undoubtedly just taken from excavations and put into private collections, some of which filter down to auctions or estate sales and the like in today's time. Some might even suspect that this practice has continued down to modern times, but who really knows?
Could they have no shop?
Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me if this vase is considered pre-dynastic or if it's from the Old Kingdom. These types of precision-made hardstone artifacts disappear from the timeline after the 3rd and 4th dynasty, and even if they are found in burials dated to that time.
So what I'm doing is I'm just basically making these triangles a bit bigger so that we've got a bit more computing power on my computer, and just to help with smoothing it, and yeah, no real other reason other than making it in the file more manageable. Again, we've already lost the accuracy, so I see no harm in just making the file not as ginormous.
Many of them are admittedly inherited heirlooms that are far older. This isn't controversial, it's the official line, as explained in the museum at Saqqara when discussing the 40 to 50,000 of such artifacts that were discovered beneath the step pyramid of Djoser, a ruler of the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom. These artifacts are generally dated by where they are found, or by whatever poorly scratched or chiseled name is found on them. It's a glaringly obvious technological mismatch between the hieroglyphs and the object itself that I've discussed many times. Before we get into the scan results, I do want to provide some context around these hardstone vases and their place in ancient Egyptian history. I've covered the vases in detail in a couple of previous videos, so do check those out if you haven't seen them, as we're going to speedrun it this time. Here we go. There exists a category of artifacts from the earliest times of ancient Egypt. Hardstone vases, vessels, dishes and more, ranging in size from large to very small, made from a wide range of igneous stone like granite, diorite, porphyry, slate, schist, syenite, rock crystal or even corundum, all incredibly hard materials, harder than steel, ranging from 6 to 9 on the Mohs scale of hardness. They display truly remarkable characteristics of precision manufacturing: perfect symmetry and balance, immaculate polished and smooth surfaces, machining and turning tool marks on the interiors, and some with an astonishing thinness of material, translucent stone, down to even 1/40th of an inch thick. Truly challenging, as these types of hard stones become brittle when thin, and carving them is no simple task. The stone matrix goes from softer materials like mica or hornblende to very hard materials like the obvious large quartz crystal inclusions seen on many examples. Found in great numbers in burials from as far back as Mesolithic times, they're often displayed next to bones, beads, and primitive pottery vases, clearly imitations of the hardstone vessels, some even painted to mimic granite. The bulk of these were recovered from beneath the 3rd Dynasty step pyramid of Joseph at Saqqara, 40 to 50,000 of them, and fragments of vases and dishes can still be seen and handled down there today. Many of these are, as I mentioned earlier, inherited and collected from earlier times, even according to the official story. After the 3rd and 4th Dynasty, these objects disappear from the Egyptian timeline, with a very few exceptions, and even then those are dated to the poorly inscribed glyphs that are found on them. After this period, ancient Egyptian vases were generally formed from alabaster or white calcite, a far softer stone that is orders of magnitude easier to work and which can be shaped with simple hand tools. These alabaster vases, while beautiful, do not display the same characteristics of precision that the older hard stone vases do. A scene on a wall found in Saqqara is used by Egyptologists to explain all of the vases, but rather I think it shows the manufacturing of alabaster vases alone, likely a process invented by the polymath Imhotep in order to imitate the amazing ancient stone vessels that they collected in vast numbers. Okay, now let's get into the details of the precision found on the granite vase. First, the process. A structured light scanner was used to create a model of the vase down to 1/1000th of an inch in accuracy, or around 0.02 of a millimeter. I'll make both the imperial and the metric reports of this vase scan available on my website, but I'm going to stick with the imperial measurements in this video.
So that's what I was talking about before. So they did use a structured light scan, I thought so. But they, I believe, also use that probe measurement. So we'll get into it a bit more and see. But what does concern me is if they've had to move the scanner between positions and it wasn't done by a robot arm. If it was done by a robot arm, I'm more inclined to trust it. But if it was manually moved from different positions, in my experience with scanning, it can kind of glitch it and kind of misalign things when you're moving the scanner. I only have a very cheap scanner, so don't take my word for it, but my experience is that it is possible to glitch and misalign things. So whilst it might have that accuracy for parts that it scans continuously from one position, I'm not convinced that scanning the inside of the vase and the outside of the vase and then aligning the two scans is going to be accurate. But that's only based on my experience with my cheap dodgy scanner, and I have seen scanners that have a robotic arm that knows its position and whatnot. So I don't know whether it moves it for you or whether it just calculates its position with some kind of encoder, but either way it kind of does have that factor, so keep that in mind as we progress.
For context, a sheet of printer paper is around 7.5 thousandths of an inch thick, and the width of a human hair is between 2 and 3 thousandths, so we're talking accuracy to the level of half the width of a human hair. Scanners like this are not an everyday tool. These devices are generally used for precision applications in the aerospace industry, and can run you upwards of $250,000. The vase itself is an ellipsoid, which isn't a measurable geometric shape, so different parts and surfaces of the vase were matched to geometric shapes, planes, cylinders, spheres, cones, and the like, by extremely dense point clouds made up of many thousands of points, making them extremely accurate, and this vase was scanned to a level far beyond the typical application of such a tool. Once you have a geometric shape defined, you can perform geometry on it, calculate its precision, and most importantly, its relationship to the other surfaces, shapes, and planes of the vase. This relationship between different areas of the vase is where the true precision and astounding nature of its manufacture really shows through. By defining some surfaces as control planes, or the axes of the vase, think of an X or a Y axis, as well as a true centerline, you can now not only calculate the precision of different parts of the vase, but their precision in relation to these axes and to the centerline, as Nick and Alex will explain.
Now, I walked away just then, and it's probably got to the bit where I was talking about before, where he was probing it. Yeah, so whatevs, I missed it. That's why you should watch this video in its entirety on their channel.
Vase itself is comprised of, I think, about 200,000 points stitched into a mesh, which can create what you see as the visual surface of the outside of the vase. So all of these are just a high density of points, which are then stitched together to give a solid CAD body. So Adam had the vase scanned, and he sent me the STL, in which Nick and I used Polyworks software to do the inspection. So Polyworks is one of the leading metrology softwares in manufacturing. It enables you to take point data, whether it comes from...
Oh yes, you can see my mouse good. See this line here? I believe that is probably an overlap between the two scans. I reckon an inside scan and an outside scan, and that's quite possibly the edge of each of those. Not completely sure, but I reckon there's a chance of it. Anyway, let them keep going.
A CMM, a single point CMM, or any kind of scanning technology like a structured light scanner, and produce a report that does analyze the geometry based on what I would consider typical CMM methods. Planes, lines, and points is what we try to reduce everything down to, in order to make the geometry able to communicate the geometry.
Yep.
So when we start with the very top of the vase, this is where we decided to build our geometric coordinate system. It was kind of the obvious choice, and it displayed the highest level of accuracy. So when you're building up what we consider a datum structure, you want your reference features, is what they really become, to be as accurate as possible. So the top of the vase is flat within 0.003 of an inch, which Ben did address that this can be done by rubbing two stones together.
Three.
No one's, yeah, yeah. So no one's. That's okay. That's anecdotal in my opinion, because the rest of the geometry does tell the story. So this is what we consider our primary datum A, a planar surface that locks in 3 degrees of rotation in our coordinate system, followed by the vase mouth, which I'll let Nick get into that one.
Yeah, so on the vase mouth, what we were looking at really is you have your datum A plane, and we're referencing that plane to establish the perpendicularity of the cylinder of that vase mouth. That cylinder used a little over 10,000 points to construct that feature. And when we look at that, you get a 1,000th of an inch deviation from perfect perpendicularity. And I will say also, the data with this, we didn't go out of our way to exclude a lot of points, and this is a 5,000-year-old vase. There's some deviations in this, so
yep, it's
1,000th of an inch.
Yeah,
that's really incredible to see a perpendicularity that close.
Yep. Yeah, and what you're saying, there's a bit of damage on the inside of the lip, and I'll put in some of the footage from our first talk where you showed the actual model and showed some of there is a bit of damage, like you said, and it's an old, it's like at least 5,000 years old. Oh, there we are. Yeah, cool.
Yes, yeah.
Adam's showing it. That's awesome.
Yep.
Look at that thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
We are a bit spoiled by our day-to-day lives where
that's cool.
We'll see a deviation like 13 thou and suddenly think, oh, there's an issue there. But in context, it's still absolutely remarkable for its age.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, that shows in that cylindricity measurement there how cylindrical that feature is, 13 thousandths of an inch. So, these are deviations from what a perfect geometric feature would be.
Yeah.
And that is crazy.
Yeah, it is. And I want to be clear so people understand what we're talking about. So the way this, what did you describe this as? It's oblate, or it's oblong, like the nature of the vase. It's not like a geometrically measurable shape on its own. And what you're doing when you scan it is you're mapping a geometric shape that then you can perform geometry calculations on, be it a cylinder, a sphere, a cone, a flat plane. That's what that's how you determine the relative nature of different parts of the vase to each other, right? You're mapping geometric shapes to sections of the vase and then performing geometry on those.
When my computer's finished doing what it's doing, I can kind of show you that. You did see it before earlier on in the video. where I used the generate face groups function and generated the groups based on the faces, and that's what I used to separate the outside right at the very beginning, the outside of the model from the internal core, just for reference.
Right. Yeah. And to be a little more specific, just explain a little bit. Best fit is something that I think most people will understand the concept of just by the name of it. One of the things to note here is, like you said, we're constructing a cylinder out of something that, technically is possibly not perfectly a cylinder on the part, but when you have 10,000 points to make that, and you're fitting a cylinder to those as perfectly as possible, that's a lot of data, and it represents that feature really well. The thing about that is, when you take normal CMM measurements, you might measure a cylinder with 18 points or something. You have a lot less data to construct that with. And this,
I'm guessing the CMM is that probe thing,
is using over 10,000 points to make that. So it's just a very robust construction of that feature. And I know that is something it's hard to conceptualize when we're talking about, well, this is a cylinder and this is a cone and this is a sphere. And we talk through these geometric shapes that we're constructing, and we talk about how many points. And the reason it's important is because the more points we get, the better that construction actually approximates what that feature is.
Right.
And that kind of carries through to where we get to the body of the vase, which to me is one of the most interesting parts. It's got a lot going on there that I think is important to point out and talk to in a little bit of detail.
Yep. And then the other thing to point out, I think, on this one is that you're defining like sort of control surface B here. So that's if you like, the vertical axis relative to the x-axis or the horizontal plane of the top of it. So you've got now two control surfaces that you can measure the other aspects of the vase against.
Yeah. And this is kind of shown here. So if we go down to the vase body, you can see where this coordinate system ends up.
Yep.
And the key thing about that is, so as Alex had kind of alluded to before, that top plane is going to control 3 rotations.
Yep.
And, well, actually it's 2 rotations.
My computer
like that.
Yep.
And like that. And then a translation. Right.
I'm just going to walk away.
That third rotation is not controlled
on my phone,
but that's okay because these features are not something that need to be clocked.
Right.
That's what that last rotation is. And then positionally, that plane can shift around, and once you define that B as the cylinder, that locks it to the center point of that cylinder.
Okay.
So now we have a coordinate system on the top, leveled to the top, and exactly in the center of where that cylinder is.
Okay.
So that defines the center axis of the whole entire vase that we are going to talk about all those other features in relation to.
Okay. Got it.
So if you want, I'll go through and talk about the body.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really interesting, and I have some props here that I kind of wanted to go over because it's something that I guess is a hard concept. I'll talk about the report real quick before I stop sharing. So for this vase body feature, this spherical feature that we're constructing, we're going to use over 77,000 points to do that. And the control that we're using is coaxiality. So it sounds just like what it is. You have features that are along the same axis, and you're measuring how close that is. So again, that's relative to B, which is the cylinder on that mouth. And that measurement comes out at 17 thousandths, which is relative to a lot of the other numbers on this report, it's a little bit bigger, but I'm going to explain why it's still insane. So
yeah, it's still remarkable precision.
Yes, it is. It is very remarkable. So what I have here is what we call a calibration sphere or a qualification sphere. So this guy is an artifact. It is serialized, and it has a very precise measurement that is essentially traceable, right? So we know that this sphere is spherical. These are pretty much as spherical as we can make things, all right? The importance of that is no matter how I measure this, if I measure with 5 points across the whole sphere, or I measure 5 points in a little tiny area, that math will result in the same center point being calculated because it is very spherical.
Right.
That's a very important concept here because I'm going to apply that to the sphere that we have in the middle of this vase that uses almost 78,000 points to construct a sphere and is in line with the center of that mouth with a deviation of 17 thousandths of an inch.
And that's in 2 axes.
That's in 2 axes. That is a composite deviation. So if you were to look at that in X and Y, you can imagine that that's actually not as large of a number in a single axis.
Yeah. This may be a little difficult to see, but this is the gap between the teeth of this pair of calipers. That is a 17 thousandths deviation.
Yeah.
So
and again, if you think about it in terms of sheets of paper, you're just roughly over 2 sheets of paper. That's 2 sheets of printer paper off of the center line of a feature that's considerably far away for what we're talking about here. And again, the reason I brought up this sphere is because when you measure a sphere, the form of that sphere impacts where you find the center point. The center point is what we are saying is 17 thousandths off. So if that sphere was not symmetric, it wasn't a good formed sphere. So you can imagine you could have a sphere that kind of looks like this, right?
Yep.
Or you could have a perfect sphere. When you deform that sphere, it changes the center point,
right,
where it's measured. So you have to actually make that feature very symmetrically spherical to be able to get that center point to line up like it is.
Wow.
Which is important because you don't do that by hand over such a large area in granite, in rose granite. It's just something that I can't see physically being possible. You have to have this thing on a rotational axis that is very stable, and be turning it about that axis to create a sphere like that. So it's really just crazy to see this. It was one of the things that I didn't expect, and when we saw this, we were just like, this is it right here.
Wow.
And that's not even getting to the lug handles. So
I mean, and that's right, and the lug handles are even more impressive. But thank you for explaining that. That's just, of course it was, flint, chisels, and pounding stones, right? That's how it was done. Jesus. Yeah. Wow. That's a great way. That's that relative geometry, and then that explanation of I mean, how do you even keep because even if it's turning, right, even if you've got that thing precisely centered and you're carving that part of the vase, you still have to maintain that spherical geometry on that section precisely. Otherwise, you'll skew off those readings that you make thousands of years later. So I can understand that. So to me, it's not just, okay, was it turned? Yes. Was it cut in granite very precisely? Yes. But then whatever's guiding that tool also just has to be operating with some remarkable degree of just precision and steadiness. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah, and it's safe to assume when, in order to control that central axis, as Nick said, to carve the outside of the body, the restraint then would have had to have been on the already fabricated inside lip of the vase.
Right.
And then also to be able to restrain it with enough pressure to keep it from deforming and maintain that geometry is remarkable.
The question of whether it's turned, I mean, some of these look like they were, but it doesn't explain the lug handles. You would have had to remove that and make sure that the contours are the exact same measurements as everything else, which without turning it. So if you can do that, why would you turn it to begin with?
It would, yeah, if we were to do this today in the shop, it would be an initial turn with the geometry for the lug handles as one, which would then come back with a mill to finish between the lug handles.
That was a question I had, which would be, if we were to try and make this today, how would we do it? And I assume it would be, a combination of lathe and then like 5-axis CNC high-end machine.
Yeah, and those are very high-end and expensive
I'll bet.
machines.
The question of provenance, I've addressed a few times, and I would argue with anyone who would say that would argue the provenance of these vases. This one obviously did not come out of a museum, but if they were to argue the provenance, I would ask them to show me how they could make it so cheaply.
Yeah, and bear in mind too that the technology that we have today with these 5-axis mills, not like we've had that since the industrial age, where a lot of these things came. These things. I know a lot of them went into private collection through that period. I mean, it's a whole meta point about the nature of even seeing things like the tube drills, Petrie's Core 7, looking at saw marks and the evidence for circular saws. It took our civilization up until the industrial age to really even be able to put that stuff into context. Even for guys like Petrie to be some of the first to look at it and say, what is this? Like we do, we're starting to develop these capabilities for machining ourselves, and I'm looking at the same evidence, but it's in stone that's been sitting here for thousands of years on sites like Abu Sir and wherever else. Like that, it blows my mind to think about that. It took us that long to even start to have the framework to understand what we're looking at.
And as you said, civilizations will tend to try to solve problems through the lens of their own experience. Yep. So Nick and I can sit here and discuss how we would make this vase today, but we do need to be grounded and recognize we don't have evidence for it. This is the very basics of reverse engineering. Is we're starting with a finished piece and trying to work our way backwards, and we can only address the evidence in front of us for the time being.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's get into the lug handles then, because those things are, and the point we made a minute ago, or Nick made, and Adam also you made, is that you can't turn the lug handles, right? And I do get this comment quite a bit when we're talking about vases, and I've been talking about the evidence for lathes. Petrie talked about lathes, but yes, you cannot turn. Obviously you can't turn those lug handles. You'd have to leave a ridge or a bullnose or something that's in that geometry of the lug handles all the way around, then come back with if you were turning it, and you'd have to come back with a different tool, which I think, as you guys told me last time, just changing tools with this type of precision can introduce errors, and often does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the big things with the lug handles that is very interesting is that to each other, we have obviously. So I wanted to point out, lug handle 1 is designated as datum F.
Yep.
And that is what we use on lug handle 2 in that parallelism call out. So to each other, parallel, they're 7/1000ths of an inch parallel. And then we look at both of them back to that top flat and then the center cylinder. And we're looking at the parallelism of those cylinders, the lug handles, to that top flat. And the lug handle 1 is 1/1000th of an inch parallel, and the lug handle 2 is 5/1000ths of an inch parallel. And then the perpendicularities line up really well with that kind of range of measurement, where you have both of those being reported as 3/1000ths of an inch perpendicular to that center cylinder. So again, we're looking at a piece that has 5,000 years worth of wear and damage, and these numbers are something that you wouldn't find in something that you hand cut.
No.
Reference to each other, at the very least, they are so close in being parallel. And then when you start looking at things, and we had talked a little bit about this before, Ben, where, you know, it's the crazy part about measurement isn't something how circular it is or how, you know, how flat it is, or it's that geometry in reference to something else somewhere else, right? When you start being able to have that ability, that means that you're not just cutting something by hand and making it look nice, then going to the other side and cutting it by hand and making it look nice. You have some way of making those so similar that it just ends up being parallel. Whether that is some form of technology or some pattern, or I have no idea. As Alex said, you know, the thing about this is we're looking at a data set, and we're not sure what made these vases and what technology they had, but it's very obvious that the technology was such that it was not at least hand cut.
Oh yeah,
that is for sure.
For sure. Yeah, and I think it
may not have been cut at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. There could be any number of other. Who knows? Like, that's the thing. We just don't know what we don't know in this sort of thing. And I tried to raise the same thing on Rogan and say, you know, we'll know more in a year, 10 years, 100 years when it comes to science. So some of these answers may exist outside of our current realm of knowledge. But at least just looking at this, and when I think about things like symmetry, we've got these vases, and I know, Alex, you talked about the point you did a little experiment with a tolerance gauge. You measured it, you stuck it against like one of the lug handles, and spun the vase, and it just it didn't even budge when it touched the other one. So there's
the indicator zeroed on both, and that was at reference to the bottom of the vase. So it would have been a different reference surface in order to tell the difference between the two.
Yeah,
but still remarkable precision.
Height on this side as you do the other, so everything seems to be in alignment. You've got concentricity between this area, that area, and the inside, and the whole thing.
Right, but if it's a CNC machine would do that. I don't think you need it to be spinning this thing.
Well, I mean, a simple lathe, you know, would do it. No, it wouldn't have to be CNC. You can't really argue for a CNC, but certainly machine. And you know, Petrie talked about Egyptian lathes, ancient lathes.
Well, you can see spirals in the middle, in the inside, so that was clearly drilled out or something, right?
See, that's remarkable. I wasn't expecting to see that.
That precision, yeah.
No.
Yeah, and for my mind, one of the things that, and I mentioned this as well, which was when you look at this, you think about symmetry, and you look at some of the faces, and you know, your dad's work with the photographs and the reverse transparencies of the Ramses head. I mean, it's almost like this is the efficient way to design it, right? You create a template, you create a design for one handle, you flip it, and you just mirror it over here, and then you execute it. And I mean, it's just from an efficiency perspective, maybe that's how it might have been done. But that, you know, this symmetry is something we see, and I think it's a real indicator of some form of advanced technology being utilized, to my mind, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
So we'll move on from the lug handles, and I picked a couple more reference surfaces. So the top, so the overall shape of the vase can be described as an ellipsoid. So it does not follow one singular style of feature as we had spoke. So the top of it most closely resembled a cone. So it was reduced down to a cone over about 30,000 points, which is still a remarkable amount of data. And these two results are also astounding. So you have parallelism to what we had determined as datum B, which is the inside lip of the vase. I'm sorry, parallelism to B, perpendicularity to A as our top reference surface. So the cone is considered a line reducible feature. So if you look at just two lines, what their relationship is to one another, at the plane and the line, my apologies, you're still 3 and sub 3,000ths of an inch. So, your typical width of a human hair in geometric accuracy. So
nuts.
Once again, very high evidence of a very precise tool that created these features. The bottom lip of the vase as well has some curvature to it, so that was reduced down to a sphere, which is a point reducible feature similar to what we did with the body. And over 4,300 points, we have 10,000ths of an inch in deviation. Remarkable numbers.
Yeah.
And
well, and
the bottom,
and assume the same inference that Nick you made earlier about this spherical geometry of keeping that thing centered. Yeah. Same points making that. Okay.
So a lot of the function of GD&T is that it will also absorb the form of the features being inspected. Okay. So while it's not reportable for a sphere, it's still taken into account when you look at the deviation of that point from our datum structure coordinate system.
Okay.
And the bottom of the vase was also reduced to a cone with a parallelism of B of 9 thou and perpendicularity to A of 5.
Yeah.
Once again, still sub 10, and over a much larger volume set, about 58,000 points.
Right, and it's and a long way from surfaces A and B, which are at the other end of the vase, right?
Exactly. So yeah, the further you get away from your reference surfaces, the greater deviations you tend to see in your hardware.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I don't know what else to say about it. So that's cool. It's. I think that's the challenge, right? I think that's I'm hopeful that this. I'm hopeful that these results and I think this discussion I'm hoping it can move the whole topic of ancient engineering and ancient technology and precision along a little bit, because I don't know, I'd put a challenge out to anybody that suggests you can make this type of thing by hand to give it a go and see if you can get it scanned and see how close you get. Document how you do it with the primitive techniques and see what realm of precision you can get into. I'm fairly skeptical that it's possible. Let's just say that.
Even if it was, we talked about this many times too. Like the law of large numbers suggests that even if it was possible, it would have taken a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody would dispute that. It could take months, years, whatever. The value would be very high. These wouldn't be cheap pieces for anybody in any time period, in any epoch, in any culture, in any part of the world. So how do you take, and I think Lauer was the one that was excavating Saqqara, and he found multiple caches of like 20, 30, 40,000 stacked up like Tupperware.
Yep.
If they're that valuable, you wouldn't just throw them in the closet and shut the door.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely, I think people saw the value in them, and maybe Joseph just had I do think you can see this in later epochs in Egypt, in particular the New Kingdom, 19th dynasty, where these kings, seeing themselves as gods, would I think in a lot of cases reclaim older artifacts, and they certainly got in the practice of writing their names on damn near everything. I mean, you've got statues and other like artifacts with 3 or 4 different pharaohs' names written on it, until Ramses and Merenptah figured out that, well, if they carve their name really deeply, then they make it real difficult for other people to erase it.
Never high relief, right? But like the ancients, their first inclination was to do high relief, and everybody else was low.
That's right.
So.
Yeah.
So back to the challenge that would ideally be presented to anyone that wants to face it would be one thing that Nick and I are working on is generating a step file from the STL file that we have of a scan. So it's an uncommonly known fact that a scan file can't just be automatically translated into CAD. It has to be sketched off of the existing scan to make a solid CAD body.
Okay.
So we're in the process of creating CAD and a drawing for this vase, and would like to release it through whichever medium we would all seem most appropriate to say, I'd like to offer this up to be made in a machine shop out of aluminum. If somebody wants to try to make it by hand out of clay, and if someone thinks they can make it by hand out of granite, that's fantastic, because we need to explore any and all ideas of manufacture for this. But the most important part of this work is that we are able to hold it to the same stringent measurement standards and really truly vet whether or not this is capable, to be done in the way that is commonly accepted. So if our best artisans, I can't make assumptions of who would actually take up this challenge to create this piece by hand. We can say here with an assumptive tone that it can't be done by hand just based on our manufacturing experience, but the challenge has to be put forth to to anyone who thinks that they can, and also the challenge to see who can do it on a machine, because that is also an extremely difficult task on its own to hold these tolerances.
Yeah. And I think the big point here is that, you know, in presenting this data, we don't want to make an assumption and say, you know, you can't, but right now we haven't seen it. And we would love to see it.
Yes.
Because that would give us a lot more insight on how it was done and possibly how valuable this is, or why they would have done that. If it really is a simple process of just pounding a stone on a chisel, you know, and carving this thing out, then that's, you know, that's fine. The idea here is to find out what was done. I don't want to.
Well, I would, and this is, I would channel, and I've repeated this many times in my videos. Alex, one of your favorite quotes from your dad's books, Chris Dunn's books, is, you know, he has a 4-step test in there for experimentalists, and I think that's exactly along the lines of what we need to follow, which is you have to honestly evaluate the ancient artifact, including the most difficult aspects of it, and then, you know, go and do what you know, make it, replicate it using the methods you think made it, and then do a honest comparison of it, including those most difficult aspects. It's the same thing I come back with every time somebody, you know, laps a surface down to get pretty flat, or somebody carves like an inside corner on a block of granite just in isolation. I'm like, these are elements of these artifacts, sure, but there's many more difficult aspects of them. And I think the main thing, and I see this, and I think we might find the same thing if we could analyze things like boxes and some of the other artifacts. It's the relativity of these planes to each other, because, you know, these are single piece objects. Like they're not, as far as we know, not cast. You know, they're not bolted together from different pieces. They're carved in a single piece of granite. I mean, or very hard stone. And, you know, maintaining that geometry across a single object is a massive part of that precision, and that's what we're seeing with the results of scans like these.
Absolutely. And the process of performing the scans, whether it is with the intention of proving geometric accuracy, from a preservation standpoint, is invaluable on its own. To have, you know, very, very precise scan data of some priceless artifacts to human existence is a task worth performing, regardless of the intention of outcome.
Yeah. And we might learn something, right? That's the other thing. Like we can only stand to learn something from this exercise. So
precisely.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that really drove me to get really interested in this. Is, you know, I enjoy measurement for the truth that it brings.
Yeah.
And the data is data. It doesn't have an opinion. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And I am completely open-minded to what the data means, but at the end of the day, we have to go out and we need to collect more and see if there are correlations to be made. You know, if there's statistical analysis that we can do over a set of, you know, 1,000 vases, and see, is this, like Alex said earlier, a standard part? Because in manufacturing today, that's what we do. We run statistical analysis to ensure that our process is creating a part that is conforming and that is more or less standard the whole way through.
Yeah.
And if this is the same thing, we would see it. I mean, we would see it with the techniques that we analyze things with today. That would be really interesting to see, because it would give us a little more insight.
Yeah,
and that's a great point that Nick brought up. Like, the world's full of anomalous objects, but if we can demonstrate that this is like a repeatable technique, potentially used by the same tech or the same tools all over the place, not just in the vases, but in the other components that are basically littering the desert in Egypt.
Yeah.
You know, we would have some pretty significant statistical evidence.
I agree. Yeah, and it's a good time to reiterate that I guess ask to anybody that has access to these types of artifacts that thinks they display these elements of precision, then please do reach out, because I know you guys are well connected around the world, and you know people that have access to these types of machines in lots of places, and it would be fantastic to build up a body of work so we can start doing exactly that.
We can start with Petri core number 7.
Yes,
that's the high one on my list.
Yes,
definitely. Yep.
That's the beauty of this work as well, is that once digitized, the evidence is irrefutable, and
Indeed.
that will save a lot of time.
It sure will. Yeah. Very good. All right, guys. Thanks. That's epic. Cool. Thank you so much for spending some time with me chatting. Is there any you guys on social media or anything like that? Do you want people bothering you on those fields or anything, or just they can all do it through me?
Yeah,
up to you guys.
No social media here. Everybody
Okay.
can just
all right, throw
it at you.
All right, good. Yeah, well, we'll stay in touch. But yeah, thanks so much for chatting with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Ben.
Cheers. All right.
Take care.
5 million broken mobiles are stored in our homes. That's one for every 5 people in Australia. Join the nationwide challenge to recycle unused mobiles and go for zero with Mobile Muster. Trusted for 25 years.
All right, well, there you have it. Some utterly astounding results, and something that I think is a world
My
first.
computer is still
scanning a
computing.
truly ancient artifact down to this level of precision, and some legitimate expert analysis of the results. I want to extend my sincere thanks to Alex Dunn, Nick Sierra, and Adam Young for their time and their efforts in getting this work done, as well as for reaching out to me to help communicate the results. Personally, and based on my own research in this field, I think the implications of this work on our understanding of ancient technology that must have been utilized who knows how many thousands of years ago, are profound. And I do think that this work represents a game-changing advance to the whole discussion of just what might have been happening in the distant eras of our own past. There are a host of other implications and details we could get into based on these results, and we do get into them in the full discussion with Alex, Nick, and Adam. I will release the full talk with those guys in podcast format as the next video on this channel, so hit the like and subscribe button if you're interested in that. Before I finish here, I want to acknowledge that many other people around the world have also been making legitimate efforts to explore the depths of ancient precision, in scales both large and small, and I'm hugely encouraged by those efforts, even if they mostly seem to come from independent or so-called alternative fields. My friend Patrice Poyard and his team have done excellent work scanning and analysing the granite caves of Barabar in India, along with detailed investigations into stonework in other places, as documented in his highly recommended work, Builders of the Ancient Mysteries. This documentary is now free to watch on YouTube. Please do check it out, it's definitely worth your time, and if you want to support their efforts, check out the affiliate link to watch it for a few bucks. You can find it linked below in the description. If you're watching this and you do happen to have access to artifacts like this vase, and you're willing to have them analysed, then please contact me. As discussed in the video, we hope to build up a body of work, and you'd be contributing to the cause of open-minded research into our past, a growing movement that I feel confident will only get stronger. Also, to those who might snort in derision.
Alrighty, well look guys, my computer is taking freaking forever to do this computing that it's trying to do at the moment. So rather than have you all sit there waiting for it, and rather than just plagiarizing another video from Uncharted X, I'm going to wrap this one up and bring in a part 2 once this operation finishes, and I do like a bit of file size reduction on this just to make it more bearable for everybody to watch. So I'm going to cut the stream and you guys enjoy what you got to see.